The year is 1961. In Berlin, a wall of concrete and barbed wire begins to slice through the heart of Europe. Families wave from windows, soldiers guard checkpoints, and the Cold War divides not only streets but destinies. The air is heavy with the sound of jackhammers and shouted commands, a new scar cutting through a city already fractured by war. Yet imagine, just for a moment, if that wall had been the symbol not of containment but of victory. What if the Soviet Union had triumphed, and the red flag had outlasted the stars and stripes? What if the story of the 20th century had turned upon this single stone and spread outward, rewriting the very idea of freedom and power? And before we drift into this alternate path of history, I welcome you. Wherever you are listening, whether in the quiet of your bedroom or in the hush of an evening chair, you are part of this shared journey through memory and imagination. We will move together through shadows of the past and possibilities of the present, slowly peeling back layers of what could have been. If you enjoy these explorations, please subscribe to World History Reversed so that together we may continue to unlock new corridors of time. The Wall of Berlin rises not as a desperate barrier to keep its people in, but as a monument to victory, a proclamation that socialism has endured the storms of war and now marches forward with confidence. Imagine the East German border guards not anxiously watching for defectors, but instead standing tall as representatives of the future, secure in the knowledge that the tide of history runs with them. In this world, Western hesitation in the late 1940s has grown into fracture. The Marshall Plan, weakened by suspicion and economic strain, has failed to bind Europe together. Across the continent, communist parties once held in check gather strength from post-war hunger, from the yearning for equality, from the disillusionment with a capitalist system still reeling from depression and war. The streets of Rome echo not with American jazz carried through radios, but with marches of solidarity. In Paris, posters of Chekhov and Mayakovsky are displayed in university halls. Across West Germany, industrial strikes, never subdued, tip the balance towards socialist unions. And in this alternate unfolding, by the mid-1950s, NATO is fragile, its unity corroded by suspicion, its promises of defense less convincing as American resources stretch thin. The Korean War, which in our reality showed American resolve, here reveals exhaustion, a war too costly and uncertain for the American public to sustain. The Soviets seized the narrative. Capitalism is not only exploitative but unsustainable, prone to collapse under its contradictions. Picture Washington, the halls of Congress shadowed by debates more bitter than ever, accusations of weakness traded like weapons. In this version of history, McCarthyism does not burn out as a fever but as a poison, leaving American society fractured, its trust in institutions broken. Meanwhile, Moscow moves with calculated discipline. Stalin may pass, but his successors prove less rigid, more adept at weaving ideology with opportunity. Nikita Khrushchev, instead of faltering during the Cuban standoff, never faces such humiliation, for Cuba is not a bargaining chip, but a beacon of expanding power. Berlin becomes the symbolic city of this reversed world. Where in our history the West celebrated its survival through airlifts and alliances, here it finds itself isolated. The famous airlift of 1948 becomes a memory of desperation rather than triumph, insufficient to break Soviet determination. Imagine walking through Alexanderplatz as banners are unfurled, red cloths rippling against gray stone, music echoing from brass bands, the crowd lifting voices not in defiance but in celebration. Western visitors, journalists from London or New York, write reports not of Soviet brutality, but of Soviet order, of a people who, though disciplined, appear united. Was it illusion, or did belief itself create the appearance of strength? Pause and consider the ordinary lives within these possibilities. A young man in East Berlin, instead of dreaming of escape through tunnels, dreams of studying engineering under scholarships tied to Soviet industries. A family in Warsaw, instead of hiding Western records under floorboards, sends their children to summer camps in Moscow, where stories of Lenin and Gagarin inspire loyalty. Culture bends, not because it must, but because in this vision, success makes it attractive. The red star on uniforms and rockets becomes not merely a symbol of repression, but of achievement. And yet, even in this scenario of Soviet triumph, questions emerge like cracks in ice. Could a system built on control truly sustain inspiration? Would the promises of equality withstand the weight of bureaucracy? Would prosperity flow evenly across vast territories, or would triumph only magnify contradictions? In our world, capitalism survived its crises by adapting, reshaping itself. Here, perhaps, communism achieves victory not by suppression alone, but by flexibility, by allowing controlled freedoms, calculated reforms, a careful dance between ideology and pragmatism. Listen closely, as though standing near Checkpoint Charlie at night. The streets are empty, the air cold, lamps casting pale circles on cobblestones. In our timeline, this checkpoint represented tension, the clash of superpowers staring across a narrow street. In this alternate reality, footsteps echo not in fear, but in confidence, the steps of soldiers patrolling a border that no longer feels temporary but permanent. Beyond them, the city sleeps beneath banners of red, the silence heavy not with dread, but with inevitability. This is where the story begins, with Berlin not as a contested city, but as the first jewel in a crown of victory. From here, the spiral spreads outward. Washington uncertain, Europe divided, Moscow rising. What if history had chosen this path? What songs would have been sung? What machines built? What futures imagined? As you close your eyes, let the image linger. Footsteps on wet pavement, the night watch of a victorious empire, and the quiet certainty that the world has already changed. The footsteps fade, and in their place rises the sound of static, a low and restless hum that once filled the night air of every Cold War city. The shortwave radio sits on a kitchen counter in a modest American home, its dial glowing faintly, the tuning wheel carefully adjusted by anxious fingers. Through the noise come fragments of languages, Russian voices, English commentaries, coded numbers read aloud in measured tones. Each fragment carries a weight of possibility, for information in this world is more than news. It is survival, proof of which side controls the narrative. In our history, Radio-Free Europe sought to pierce the Iron Curtain with messages of hope. In this alternate world, it is Radio Moscow that carries authority. Its broadcasts beamed across oceans, received not only in Warsaw and Prague, but in New York and Chicago. The tone is calm, assured, and persuasive, speaking of inevitable progress, of peace through socialism, of prosperity won by collective effort. Picture Washington as these signals spread across the continent. Within the capital, debates rage under high ceilings, senators speaking not with confidence but with strain, their voices rising in bitterness. The promise of containment, that fragile idea that the Soviet system would collapse if held in check, has dissolved into embarrassment. Containment has failed. The American people, weary of war in Korea and hesitant about further sacrifice abroad, begin to question the very foundation of their global role. Each failed alliance in Europe becomes another line of criticism in congressional hearings. Should American families send their sons to defend distant lands when allies falter and rivals thrive? Imagine President Eisenhower at his desk, not remembered for calm leadership but for presiding over decline. His warnings about the military-industrial complex now sound hollow, for industry itself is shrinking, unable to match the Soviet surge in heavy machinery, in rockets, in nuclear arsenals. In this altered memory, NATO is less than a shield. It is a cracked vessel, its members hesitant to commit resources to a vision that no longer inspires. Paris leans leftward, Rome listens to Moscow, and London, though stubborn, feels the pressure of isolation. Washington's diplomats write cables filled with unease. Europe is slipping away, not by invasion, but by persuasion, by the slow erosion of belief in the American promise. Consider the mood of the American people in this fragile decade. On the streets of Detroit, unemployment grows as industries fail to compete. Newspapers print photographs of Soviet factories gleaming with efficiency, their smokestacks symbols of power. At church meetings, questions are whispered. Has America lost its moral edge? In universities, students debate whether capitalism can survive, their professors pointing to Marx not as an adversary, but as a rival whose predictions seem fulfilled. McCarthy's crusades, which in our history collapsed under excess, here leave a lasting scar. The search for traitors becomes a national obsession, breeding distrust among neighbors and colleagues. Instead of strengthening the nation, it weakens it, turning suspicion inward while the Soviets look outward. And within the Kremlin, strategy unfolds with meticulous care. Soviet leaders understand that victory is not only measured by tanks and missiles, but by perception, by the ability to project inevitability. They orchestrate grand displays of progress, agricultural reforms presented as miracles, space launches timed for maximum impact, cultural delegations sent abroad to charm skeptical audiences. American attempts to match these gestures feel clumsy, out of step with the moment. Imagine a delegation of Soviet musicians performing in Carnegie Hall, their instruments producing not just music but a message. Art, too, belongs to the victorious order. Yet every victory raises its own questions. Could the Soviet Union truly sustain this rhythm of triumph, or would the demands of constant expansion reveal hidden cracks? The propaganda machine may proclaim unity, but beneath the surface, rivalries remain. Hardliners push for control, reformers argue for flexibility. The dream of global socialism depends upon balance, upon the careful management of ambition. Even in victory, there is tension, the unspoken fear that too much success might invite overreach. Still, the image of Moscow grows in the American mind, a looming presence carried not only by newspapers, but by the very airwaves that flow into homes at night. Families gather around their radios, listening to voices from afar, sometimes in anger, sometimes in secret fascination. What if those promises of equality were not lies? What if the Red Star truly marked the future? For some, curiosity becomes sympathy. For others, it is the fuel of fear. Now shift the perspective from the domestic to the intimate. Picture a lone American diplomat in Berlin, seated in a cramped office filled with smoke and papers. He listens to the distant broadcasts as he writes his reports, each word heavy with frustration. The West is losing ground not through battle, but through belief. He describes the faces of Germans who once looked westward but now look east, drawn by the promise of stability. He wonders, privately, whether his children will grow up in a world where the United States is no longer the guiding light but a fading empire. The static from his radio accompanies his thoughts like the sound of a restless sea. It is in moments like these that history spirals into speculation. What if Washington, confronted with failure, chose retreat rather than resistance? Could America have turned inward, abandoning the role of global leader? Or would desperation have fueled radical new strategies, alliances unthinkable in our own timeline? Imagine, for instance, overtures to China not in the 1970s, but in the 1950s, a desperate gamble to counterbalance Moscow's power. Imagine the birth of a new ideology in America, one that blended capitalism with elements of socialism, seeking to survive by adaptation rather than confrontation. And yet, every possibility returns to the sound of that radio, the static that fills the night. For static is more than noise. It is uncertainty, the hum of competing truths. To listen is to choose, to decide which voice carries authority. In this alternate Cold War, the Soviet voice is louder, clearer, and more confident. Washington remains uncertain, its leaders struggling to speak above the noise. As the night deepens, the static fades once more, not into silence, but into the low hum of rocket engines. The signal changes, the broadcast announces triumphs in the sky, and the scene shifts upward into the realm of the space race, where victory is measured not in speeches, but in stars. The footsteps of Berlin, the static of Washington, now give way to the roar of engines lifting humanity beyond Earth itself. The hum grows into a roar, deep and resonant, filling the skies above Kazakhstan. On a lonely steppe stands a steel tower, its frame glowing under floodlights, and at its peak rests a rocket larger than any cathedral. Flames burst downward, dust rises like a storm, and humanity's gaze tilts skyward as engines thunder into the night. The voice on the radio is calm, almost serene, as it announces that once again the Soviet Union has conquered the heavens. In our world, Gagarin's smile was a singular victory, a bright moment in a long rivalry. In this alternate history, it is the opening act of a continuous triumph, each mission building upon the last, each orbit a step toward undisputed supremacy in space. Picture the early 1960s with the moon as the central stage, its pale light no longer neutral but painted red in imagination. Where Our History tells of Kennedy's bold promise to land an American on the lunar surface. Here his words sound strained, less a vision than a plea to keep pace. The Soviet launches come one after another, each more ambitious, each time to eclipse Western announcements. Satellites map not only the Earth, but also the public imagination, spinning across night skies as symbols of inevitability. Children in Europe and America point upward, their parents unable to hide unease. The stars themselves seem to whisper of a new order. Consider the first moon landing in this reverse narrative. It is not an American astronaut stepping down onto the dust, but a cosmonaut, his visor reflecting a world watching in stunned silence. He carries not the stars and stripes, but a red flag, its hammer and sickle casting sharp shadows under the lunar Sunday. The moment is broadcast live, millions gathered around television sets, the image grainy yet unforgettable. Cheers erupt across the Eastern Bloc, while in Washington, leaders stare at screens in disbelief. The symbolism is overwhelming. The moon, once a shared dream of mankind, now feels like a possession, a territory claimed for an ideology. What changes ripple outward from such an event? For one, the cultural current of the 1960s bends sharply. In our history, American music, cinema, and style captured the world, carried by the aura of modernity and confidence. In this alternate arc, Soviet culture gains that aura. Ballet, long admired, becomes a symbol not of elitism but of progress. Science fiction novels written in Moscow spread across languages, shaping visions of the future in which communal colonies populate Mars and Venus, not rugged individualists planting corporate banners. The space race fuels not only technology but imagination, recasting the very meaning of modern life. Yet triumph breeds tension as well as pride. Within the Kremlin, leaders debate the purpose of such victories. Should space remain a theater of peace? Or is it to be a strategic frontier, a platform for weapons, a vantage point for surveillance? In this world, the temptation to militarize orbit is irresistible. Orbital stations rise not as neutral laboratories, but as fortresses, bristling with sensors, perhaps even weapons. The Western press calls them castles in the sky, both in awe and in fear. Washington, unable to match the pace, considers desperate countermeasures, from hidden nuclear tests to covert sabotage, each step risky, each misstep potentially fatal. Imagine, then, the psychology of ordinary people as they gaze upward. For a farmer in Iowa, the glow of a passing satellite is no longer a marvel but a reminder of defeat. For a teacher in Warsaw, it is a lesson in the inevitability of socialism's victory. For a child in Lagos, it sparks wonder. Perhaps one day Africans too will join the great project of the cosmos under Moscow's guidance. The sky itself has become political, its silence filled with competing narratives. But history never flows in one direction. Could such dominance have led to overextension? The cost of constant space triumphs is immense, draining resources, stretching industries, demanding sacrifices from citizens. Factories in Novosibirsk working day and night, mines in Siberia stripped of metals, engineers pressed into service with little rest. Would the Soviet people, proud though they may be, grow weary of endless demands? Or would the sense of victory sustain them, making sacrifice itself a form of pride? Here lies the paradox. Triumph may delay collapse, but it may also accelerate exhaustion. Pause for a moment and picture the image of the moon itself. In this alternate timeline, when artists paint it, they use red hues, not the silvery tones familiar to us. Poets speak of it as a second sun, a guiding star for humanity. Children's textbooks illustrate Soviet lunar bases with domes and antennas, young pioneers smiling as they harvest moon rocks like wheat. The night sky becomes a shared classroom, teaching not mystery but certainty. The future belongs to socialism. And yet, beneath the triumph lies the question of fragility. Can any system, no matter how powerful, truly own the stars? The roar of rocket engines, triumphant and terrifying, lingers in memory. It is not simply the sound of machines, but of a turning point in global destiny. Every successful launch echoes across continents, reverberating in boardrooms, in parliaments, in the quiet fears of ordinary families. The Soviet Union, through the conquest of space, has achieved not only military advantage, but psychological dominance. Washington's speeches sound muted, its promises tentative. The world tilts, its balance of belief shifting toward Moscow. And as the engines fade, the reflection of the moon remains, glowing faintly in the night. In our history, it was a symbol of shared possibility. In this alternate unfolding, it is claimed a red reflection shimmering upon its silent surface. The glow drifts downward, casting light not only on deserts and oceans, but into living rooms, where families sit before their televisions, faces illuminated by a pale and unshakable truth. History itself has been rewritten in the stars. Yet even this light does not last forever. The glow softens, flickering, as if seen not in the sky but on a television screen in a darkened American home. A family sits together, silent, the program ending, the reflection of red banners fading into the ordinary flicker of a black and white broadcast. The roar of engines has quieted, and in its place comes another sound. The soft crackle of a television set late at night. A different kind of glow that fills the room not with rockets, but with images of culture, stories, and identity. The triumph of space blends into the struggle for hearts and minds on Earth itself. The glow of the television fills the living room, not with the familiar rhythms of Western sitcoms or the bright tones of American commercials, but with broadcasts from Moscow, Paris, and Havana, a chorus of culture reshaped by the weight of Soviet triumph. The flicker on the black and white screen casts shifting shadows across the furniture, the faces of a family leaning forward, uncertain whether to watch in fascination or in silent disapproval. What once belonged to Hollywood now belongs to another world entirely, a world of theater, ballet, and film carried on powerful transmitters, subtitled for mass audiences, framed as art for the people. Imagine the nightly news not beginning with the voice of Walter Cronkite, but with a calm Russian anchor reporting new achievements of collective industry, new strides toward equality, new explorations beyond the Earth. The rhythm of information itself has changed, and with it, the meaning of truth. Culture, more than politics or military power, begins to shift the balance of the world. In the cafes of Paris, where once jazz records spun endlessly, Soviet ballads now drift from radios, their melodies drawn from folk traditions yet arranged with orchestral grandeur. Students who in our timeline might have carried guitars and chanted protest songs now lift their voices in revolutionary hymns, convinced that art must serve the people and that the future of music is collective, not commercial. In Rome, theaters show films imported from Moscow, their heroes, workers, and engineers rather than cowboys or gangsters. In New York, underground clubs whisper of new aesthetics inspired by the East, blending American beat poetry with echoes of Mayakovsky, combining rebellion with reverence for a victorious ideology. Picture a child sitting cross-legged before the glowing screen, holding a balloon decorated not with a cartoon mouse, but with the hammer and sickle. The balloon drifts slightly in the air with each breath of the child, its red surface gleaming in the television light. For this child, the imagery of triumph is normal, the idea that the future belongs to Moscow unquestioned. Identity itself begins at an earlier age, shaped not only by family or nation, but by the constant hum of broadcasts that cross every border. If the sky was once a neutral canvas of stars, it has become a painted theater of ideology, and culture is the brush that colors it. Yet culture is never uniform, never wholly controlled. In this imagined world, we must also consider the resistances that grow beneath the surface. In London, artists push against the weight of imposed themes, insisting that art must remain free, that beauty cannot be bound by ideology. In Chicago, blues musicians refuse to surrender their raw voices to collectivist anthems, singing instead of personal struggle, of heartbreak, of individuality. The world becomes a patchwork of competing sounds and images, some aligned with the red tide of influence, others resisting, creating underground movements that breathe quietly in basements, studios, and late-night stages. What if the Soviet victory in culture had not suffocated creativity but redirected it? Would Shakespeare still be staged, but reframed as a chronicler of class conflict? Would Picasso still paint, but celebrated less for his abstraction than for his loyalty to the workers' cause? Could American cinema survive if forced into the role of dissent, its once dominant industry reduced to small circles of avant-garde resistance? These questions remind us that victory in culture is never final. It is an ongoing negotiation between power and imagination, between imposed order and individual voice. Imagine, again, that television flicker in a living room. A program ends, the screen fades to black, and then another image appears. A broadcast of a Soviet cultural festival, thousands gathered in Red Square, their banners illuminated by torchlight, orchestras playing symphonies that speak of struggle and triumph. The roar of the crowd flows through the speakers of American households, a sound at once foreign and magnetic. For some, it inspires dread. For others, envy. For children too young to know another world, it feels inevitable, the soundtrack of their future. And culture extends beyond the screen. Fashion shifts, with uniforms and worker-inspired designs becoming global trends. Literature prizes are awarded not in Stockholm but in Moscow, where committees honor authors who blend artistry with social vision. Languages themselves begin to transform as Russian phrases slip into everyday speech across continents, borrowed not from force but from familiarity. Just as English became the language of commerce in our world, Russian becomes the language of ideology in this alternate unfolding. To speak it is to feel connected to the victorious order, to the great experiment of human history reshaped. But every balloon, however bright, drifts with the wind. The child's balloon, held tightly in small hands, begins to slip upward, floating away, carried by currents unseen. It rises past the flickering glow of the television, past the rooftops, past the noise of streets, and becomes something else entirely. In imagination, it transforms into a shape of steel, long wings glinting under the sun, a machine not of play but of surveillance. The balloon is now a plane, gliding silently at high altitude, its lenses peering downward, capturing images of a world in flux. The cultural struggle yields to another form of contest, one hidden in shadows, carried by whispers, by photographs, by secrets stolen in the night. The balloon has become a spy plane, drifting above borders invisible to the eye yet sharp as knives in the politics below. Its cameras click, its engines hum softly, and in this transformation we cross into another layer of the Cold War, reverse the realm of espionage, of hidden victories and defeats, of men and women who fight not with armies but with silence and betrayal. As culture glows openly on screens, shadows deepen behind closed doors, preparing us for the next chapter of this alternate history. The spy plane glides at impossible altitude, its silver body gleaming faintly against the thin blue of the upper atmosphere. Below, the world unfolds like a silent map, rivers cutting across continents, cities glowing faintly with industry, and military bases hidden beneath camouflage. The click of its camera shutters is steady, rhythmic, like the beating of a mechanical heart. Every photograph captured is a weapon, each strip of film a revelation. Yet in this reverse Cold War, the advantage does not belong to Langley but to Lubyanka Square, the looming headquarters of the KGB. Soviet intelligence outpaces its rival, infiltrating not only ministries abroad, but also the very heart of American decision-making. Imagine the CIA struggling with failure after failure. Its networks in Eastern Europe collapse one by one, agents betrayed before they even begin their work, their names known to Moscow in advance. Double agents flourish, men who attend secret meetings in dimly lit apartments in Berlin or Vienna, then report everything to their Soviet handlers with quiet efficiency. Each failure corrodes trust inside the CIA itself, suspicion spreading like wildfire, colleagues glancing at one another and wondering who will be the next to defect, who is already compromised. The very act of gathering intelligence becomes poisoned, paralyzed by fear of betrayal. Meanwhile, the KGB operates with confidence, its methods precise, its officers trained not only to gather secrets, but to manipulate the very perception of reality. Picture a smoky cafe in London, the air heavy with the smell of tobacco. A British civil servant sits nervously at a corner table, waiting for a contact who arrives at last, sliding into the seat across from him with a polite smile. Their conversation is brief, almost casual, but the envelope exchange contains pages that will alter strategy at NATO headquarters. The KGB excels at finding these points of weakness, exploiting loneliness, ambition, or simple disillusionment. They do not need armies to march across borders. They need only whispers in the right ears. The atmosphere of espionage is one of constant tension. In the streets of Berlin, shadows move quickly. Footsteps echo between buildings. Briefcases change hands beneath the glow of street lamps. At train stations, men board carriages and never return, vanishing into new identities created by careful Soviet forgeries. The line between loyalty and treachery blurs, every handshake possibly a trap, every friendship potentially a lie. Espionage becomes the silent battlefield on which the Cold War is truly won, not with missiles or tanks, but with secrets surrendered and loyalties bent. And espionage is not limited to governments. Consider the scientific community, where the race for technology is as critical as the struggle for ideology. Laboratories in California and Massachusetts hum with experiments, yet their breakthroughs find their way into Moscow faster than expected. Soviet scientists arrive at conferences with knowledge uncannily close to classified projects, their timing too precise to be coincidence. Imagine American engineers dismayed as their Soviet counterparts unveil prototypes already improved upon, their sense of superiority slipping with each revelation. Was it brilliance? Or simply the power of well-placed spies? In this alternate history, the answer leans heavily toward the latter. Pause and reflect on the personal cost. For every celebrated spy who secures a decisive advantage, there is a family left behind, a life torn apart by secrecy. Imagine a man in Washington, outwardly a loyal civil servant, inwardly a conduit for Moscow. At home, he kisses his children goodnight, his heart pounding with the fear of discovery. Each morning, as he walks to his office, he feels the weight of double existence pressing upon him. Loyalty to ideology, wars with loyalty to blood. And yet he continues, convinced that history demands sacrifice. How many such lives, unknown and unremembered, shaped the fate of nations? In this world of Soviet dominance, espionage is not merely reactive but proactive, a tool for shaping events before they unfold. Political scandals erupt in Washington, seeded by carefully released documents, their origins obscured, their consequences devastating. Elections tilt unexpectedly, candidates destroyed by revelations whispered into the right corridors. NATO summits collapse under the weight of mistrust, with allies doubting one another, each suspecting the other of compromise. Moscow watches patiently as its adversaries unravel, nudging only when necessary, guiding the disintegration with invisible hands. The CIA attempts bold countermeasures. Imagine desperate plots drawn in hidden rooms, plans to destabilize Eastern governments, to assassinate rising Soviet leaders, to spread dissent through propaganda. Yet almost all end in failure, uncovered before they begin, their operatives arrested, their intentions paraded on Soviet broadcasts as proof of capitalist hypocrisy. Each failure strengthens Moscow's hand, each exposure erodes America's credibility. Slowly, the world begins to believe not only in Soviet power, but in Soviet omniscience. As though the KGB has eyes everywhere, as though nothing can be hidden from its reach. But no system is without flaw. The very reliance on secrecy carries danger. The greater the success of Soviet intelligence, the greater the temptation to trust in it too completely. Could this overconfidence sow seeds of vulnerability, encouraging leaders to act recklessly, convinced of their superiority? History reminds us that intelligence, however precise, is always partial, always subject to error. In this alternate path, one wonders, would the KGB's brilliance eventually blind its masters, making them believe they could anticipate every move, control every outcome? Or would their discipline hold, sustaining their empire for decades longer than in our reality? Still, the present moment in this imagined Cold War belongs to shadows and whispers. The spy plane continues its flight, its cameras clicking, its images sent back to analysts who pore over them with weary eyes. Yet even as the photographs are studied, the deeper truth is already known in Moscow, carried not by machines but by people agents who live unseen, whose names are false, whose loyalties are hidden beneath ordinary appearances. The battlefield is everywhere, the victories invisible, the defeats permanent. At last the spy plane banks, its engines humming as it turns toward home. The sky around it is vast, blue fading into black, silent and endless. For a moment there is peace, only the steady hum of flight, the faint vibration of wings against thin air. Then, with a suddenness that startles, the quiet is shattered by the distant flash of light. A nuclear explosion blooms on the horizon, frozen in memory, its brilliance overwhelming, its meaning unmistakable. The age of espionage melts into the age of strategy, of global standoffs, of decisions that could end the world with fire. The shutter clicks one last time, capturing not secrets, but survival itself. The flash expands across the horizon, vast and blinding, though no sound yet reaches the spy plane suspended high above the earth. For an instant, it is as if the sun itself has risen in the wrong place. Too bright, too sudden, too close. The mushroom cloud climbs with terrible grace, its stem reaching skyward, its crown unfolding with slow inevitability. The cameras inside the aircraft capture frame after frame, each one a record of mankind's power to destroy, and in the stillness before the shockwave arrives, a thought forms. The Cold War is no longer only a contest of ideology or shadows. It is a confrontation balanced on the edge of annihilation. But in this reversed world, the balance tilts differently. The Soviets, victorious in espionage and ascendant in space, stand with greater confidence. Nuclear weapons, terrifying as they are, become not equalizers but instruments of persuasion. Their arsenals grow vast, their missile ranges extend farther, their delivery systems more reliable. NATO, instead of projecting deterrence, falters in disarray. The unity promised at its founding cracks beneath the pressure of Soviet superiority. Paris questions whether reliance on Washington is worth the risk. Rome wonders if peace is better purchased through accommodation. London, though resolute, senses isolation, its island geography a shield but also a prison. Washington watches helplessly as Europe drifts eastward, not through invasion but through calculation, through a collective decision that survival is more valuable than loyalty. Imagine negotiations in Paris. the ornate halls filled with diplomats whose polished shoes echo across marble floors. At the center of the table, American representatives speak with strained voices, offering promises of defense, of solidarity. Yet across the table sit emissaries from Moscow, calm, deliberate, presenting not threats, but assurances. Align with us, and peace will endure. Resist us, and catastrophe may follow. The French, weary of endless crises and convinced of American decline, lean toward conciliation. The Italians, long divided by political tensions, see in the Soviet offer a chance for stability. Even the Germans, haunted by war and anxious about division, begin to imagine a future tied not to Washington, but to Moscow. The nuclear flash captured by the spy plane is never detonated above a European city, but its shadow falls over every discussion, every calculation. The image of annihilation becomes the silent participant at every negotiation table. It is there when a diplomat raises his glass at a dinner in Brussels, when a general reviews troop deployments in Bonn, when a factory worker in Manchester reads the morning paper. The knowledge that the Soviets can not only match but surpass the West in nuclear capability reshapes the psychology of the continent. NATO's promises sound less like protection and more like invitation to destruction. And across the Atlantic, Washington grows increasingly frantic. Imagine tense meetings in the Situation Room, maps spread across tables, lines of missiles and bombers marked in red. Military advisors urge escalation, but political leaders hesitate. The American people, weary of conflict, protest against new deployments, demanding peace at almost any cost. The memory of Korea, still raw, mingles with fear of a far greater war. Senators thunder in Congress, accusing one another of weakness, betrayal, or recklessness. Unity dissolves, and with it, the credibility of American leadership. The president, no matter who he is in this alternate timeline, faces the impossible task of holding together a vision of global leadership that is slipping away piece by piece. Meanwhile, in Moscow, confidence grows. The Soviet leadership frames each step not as aggression, but as inevitability. Their speeches to the world are filled with words of peace, of cooperation, of shared progress. And yet, behind the rhetoric, the reality is clear. The Warsaw Pact is no longer a defensive alliance, but the heart of a growing empire. Its borders expand not by conquest, but by consent, by the quiet surrender of nations who choose survival over resistance. Imagine maps redrawn in textbooks, children tracing new boundaries with their fingers, learning to see Europe as a continent unified under a single order. Pause and envision the Atlantic Ocean itself, restless and vast, waves crashing endlessly against rocky shores. For centuries, it has been the buffer between the old world and the new, the distance that protected America and gave it the illusion of invulnerability. Now, that ocean feels less like a barrier and more like a fragile bridge, across which missiles could fly in minutes, across which influence flows faster than ships. The sound of those waves, once comforting, becomes ominous, a reminder that geography can no longer guarantee safety. The Soviet gaze now stretches across the Atlantic, and the United States feels its isolation more acutely than ever before. What if the Warsaw Pact had indeed stretched across the ocean, not physically, but politically? Could Latin America, stirred by revolutionary movements, have embraced Moscow's leadership with greater fervor, creating a hemisphere divided, not north and south, but east and west in ideology? Would Canada, caught between its American neighbor and the pressure of European realignment, have questioned its alliances? The possibilities multiply, each one unsettling, each one reshaping the familiar balance of the 20th century, and yet, even as the Soviets triumph, uncertainty lingers. Power built upon fear may hold for a time, but can it truly inspire loyalty? Nations may bow to Moscow's shadow, but will their people sing its praises, or will they merely endure? In this imagined history, the Soviets may claim Europe without a shot fired, but what seeds of discontent lie dormant beneath the surface, waiting for a moment to bloom? The mushroom cloud on the horizon begins to dissolve, its towering shape dissipating into wisps of smoke against the endless sky. The spy plane steadies its course, its cameras still clicking, though the images now are less dramatic. Coastlines, rivers, the ordinary landscapes of human life. Below, on the Atlantic shore, the waves crash ceaselessly, carrying with them the sound of history's uncertainty. The roar of the ocean swells, echoing in the ears of leaders and ordinary people alike, a reminder that even in moments of triumph, nothing is permanent. The waves grow louder, rising and falling in steady rhythm, until they transform into another sound, the creak of wood, the steady groan of a ship at sea. The ocean is no longer a symbol of isolation but of passage, carrying fleets across its expanse, linking continents not through distance but through power. And on one such ship, painted gray and bristling with antennae, sails a symbol of the next chapter in this alternate world. Soviet naval dominance, missiles deployed across waters once guarded by American fleets, and a small island in the Caribbean, glowing like a jewel of socialist power. The sound of the waves merges with a rhythm rising from Havana itself, a music that begins as salsa and transforms, beat by beat, into a marching song. The creak of the ship is steady, its hull cutting through the Atlantic with the patience of history itself. On deck, sailors move in rhythm, boots striking wood with the precision of a drumline. Above them, the sails are gone, replaced by steel towers and antennae that sweep the horizon like searching eyes. The ocean wind carries salt and secrecy, mingling with the faint music of a radio tuned to Havana. At first, the rhythm is playful, a Cuban salsa rising with the warmth of the Caribbean Sunday. But gradually, note by note, the melody transforms, the congas replaced by marching drums, the trumpets swelling into fanfare, the voices singing not of love, but of revolution. The music of the island has been woven into the music of empire. Cuba, in this alternate history, does not stand as a fragile ally at the edge of catastrophe, but as a glowing jewel of Soviet influence in the Western Hemisphere. The missiles that in our world were withdrawn under tense negotiation remain firmly in place here, their warheads aimed northward, their presence undeniable. Havana becomes more than a city. It becomes a fortress, a beacon, a symbol that the red tide has reached the very doorstep of the United States. Imagine the Malecón, its seawall crowded, not with couples walking in the evening breeze, but with parades of young revolutionaries waving banners, their chants echoing across the waves toward Florida. The island pulses with energy, a mixture of tropical vitality and ideological resolve, its rhythms inseparable from its politics. The Soviet Navy, emboldened by this foothold, expands its reach. Submarines slip silently beneath the surface, their shadows haunting the American coastline. Aircraft carriers painted with red stars patrol waters once dominated by the Stars and Stripes. The Atlantic, once considered an American lake, becomes contested territory, its surface a chessboard of steel and strategy. In Washington, panic simmers. Defense planners speak of encirclement, of a fortress America besieged not only from Europe, but from the Caribbean, from Africa, from the Pacific. The comfort of oceans as barriers has dissolved. The seas now belong to whoever commands them with confidence. Picture the Cuban streets, alive with color and conviction. Posters of Lenin and Martí hang side by side, blending local pride with global ideology. Children in school uniforms recite not only the lessons of socialism, but the victories of space, the triumphs of spies, the inevitability of history flowing eastward. The island thrives with Soviet aid, new factories rise along the Havana skyline, new ports bustle with goods arriving from Odessa and Murmansk. Even the sugar fields, long symbols of exploitation, are now reframed as the harvest of a collective dream. The island's music, once playful and private, has become the soundtrack of revolution. its rhythms exported across Latin America as inspiration for guerrilla fighters and sympathetic governments. And what of the United States? Staring across the narrow strait, the sight of red flags waving just 90 miles from Miami is more than humiliation. It is a constant reminder of vulnerability. Refugees flee, not only from fear but from disillusionment, carrying stories that clash with the triumphant broadcasts. Some Americans listen with horror, others with curiosity, still others with a strange sense of envy. Could it be that Cuba, small and defiant, has captured something the United States itself has lost the feeling of being part of a great and inevitable destiny? The question lingers in living rooms, whispered in classrooms, debated in bars, but never spoken too loudly in the halls of power. The Soviet presence in the Caribbean does not stop at Havana. It radiates outward, touching Nicaragua, Grenada, even whispers of influence in Mexico. Each new contact is a ripple across the Western Hemisphere. Each alliance a reminder that no region is immune to the reach of ideology. The Monroe Doctrine, once a proud declaration of American dominance, becomes a relic, quoted in desperation rather than command. The Caribbean Sea, bright with sunlight, becomes a corridor of confrontation, each wave carrying both the sound of congas and the possibility of nuclear fire. Yet even in triumph, fragility lingers. Cuba is small, its resources limited, its people proud but restless. The more heavily it becomes fortified, the more it risks suffocation under the weight of militarization. Would the joy of revolution turn stale beneath constant drills, constant slogans, constant reminders of impending war? Would its music lose vitality when absorbed entirely into propaganda? The question cannot be ignored, for even the brightest jewel may crack under too much pressure. Still, for the moment, Havana shines. Its nightclubs buzz with energy, not in secret defiance, but in proud celebration of a new order. Soviet officers stroll the streets with confidence, welcomed as brothers. American tourists, once a familiar presence, are absent. Their absence itself, a symbol of defeat. The island is no longer a playground for outsiders, but a fortress of insiders, a stage on which the future of the hemisphere is performed nightly. Imagine the harbor at dusk, Soviet ships anchored like watchful guardians, their lights reflecting on the water as the sounds of music and marching intermingle. The scene is one of paradox, joy and dread, celebration and menace, salsa and steel. And it is from this paradox that history spirals onward, for as Cuba thrives beneath the shadow of Soviet protection, another continent waits across the ocean, vast and restless. Africa, long a stage for colonial rivalry, becomes the next frontier of ideological contest. The winds that blow across Havana's harbor carry with them the scent of the sea, but also the promise of deserts, jungles, and savannas where the red flag may yet be raised. The music fades, replaced by the sound of paper pamphlets tearing in the wind, carried across empty landscapes where revolutions wait to be born. The desert wind rises, dry and relentless, carrying with it fragments of paper that twist and scatter across the empty expanse. On one torn pamphlet, the faded image of a clenched fist still lingers, its ink smudged by sand. Another flutters upward, bearing the words of revolution in bold red letters. The wind drags them both into the distance, where the horizon shimmers with heat and possibility. Africa, vast and restless, waits beneath this sky, its soil rich with minerals, its people restless beneath the weight of colonial chains. In our history, this century was one of transition, of nations claiming independence in uneven waves, often torn between the influence of East and West. But in this alternate world, where the Soviets have triumphed across Europe and the seas, Africa becomes not a contested ground but a chosen inheritance, a new stage upon which the red flag will rise. Imagine Angola not as a battlefield of proxy wars, but as a firm ally, its independence secured with Soviet weapons, its cities rebuilt with Soviet engineers, its fields cultivated under collectivist schemes. The MPLA, instead of struggling against rivals, finds itself firmly supported, its legitimacy confirmed by the authority of Moscow. In Mozambique, the Frelimo movement takes root with confidence, its leaders trained not in secret camps, but in celebrated academies of ideology. South Africa, too, trembles, for the apartheid regime faces not only internal resistance, but the encirclement of victorious socialist neighbors, each inspired and equipped by the great power across the northern seas. Picture the streets of Lagos, alive with banners of independence. Crowds gather as delegations from Moscow arrive, their presence met with cheers and speeches of solidarity. Universities open new departments devoted to Marxist economics, textbooks printed in Russian and translated into Swahili, Yoruba, Zulu, and Amharic. Young students, once dreaming of scholarships in London or Paris, now travel to Moscow or Leningrad, returning with degrees, with visions, with a sense of belonging to a global order that transcends borders. In this alternate reality, the dream of Pan-Africanism is no longer fractured, but folded into the larger dream of socialism triumphant. Yet the spread of ideology across Africa is never simple. The continent is too vast, too diverse, too layered with histories of tradition, tribe, and memory. The Soviets offer structure, but how does it fit into the rhythm of local life? Imagine a village in the Sahel where farmers gather beneath a baobab tree, listening to a Soviet-trained official speak of collective farming, of machines that will transform their labor. Some nod in agreement, eager for change. Others hesitate, uncertain whether promises made in distant capitals can truly take root in their soil. The clash between ideology and tradition is quiet, subtle, yet profound. Consider the cultural shift that accompanies political victory. African music, already vibrant with drums and voices, now carries revolutionary lyrics, blending the pulse of tradition with the chants of solidarity. Radio stations across the continent broadcast not only local songs but also Soviet anthems, translated into dozens of languages, sung with conviction by choirs of schoolchildren. Art, too, changes. Murals of workers and farmers rise on city walls, their faces proud, their tools raised like weapons of progress. In some places, the art inspires unity. In others, it feels imposed, a surface painting over deeper divisions. And what of the West? Watching from afar as Africa slips beyond its grasp. The old colonial powers, weakened by their losses in Europe and drained by decades of conflict, find themselves unable to compete. Their corporations retreat, their influence wanes, their diplomats write reports filled with resignation. The United States, once eager to shape the continent through aid and alliances, is now hesitant, uncertain, overshadowed by its failures in Europe and the Caribbean. Africa, once imagined as a battleground of proxy wars, becomes instead the foundation of a new Soviet-led global order. Yet every triumph carries seeds of fragility. Would the Soviets, already burdened with the weight of their empire, truly manage the complexity of Africa's vastness? Could they balance support with respect for diversity, or would their insistence on uniform ideology create fractures? Imagine a leader in Nairobi, proud of his people's traditions, forced to choose between loyalty to Moscow and loyalty to his own culture. Imagine communities that resist collectivization, preferring the rhythms of their ancestors to the dictates of distant officials. The possibility of resistance never disappears. It only changes form, waiting for the moment when cracks appear in the red facade. Still, for now, the victories feel undeniable. Picture the desert wind shifting into a humid breeze along the Congo River, where Soviet hydroelectric projects rise from the jungle, their turbines turning with power, their lights illuminating villages that once lived in darkness. Children splash in the water, their laughter mingling with the hum of machinery, the symbol of a promised future. In Johannesburg, strikes against apartheid grow bolder, fueled by the certainty that allies stand ready. Across the continent, the Red Star glows not as a distant emblem, but as a present force, woven into the daily lives of millions. The wind that once carried torn pamphlets now carries a new sound, the rustle of rice in faraway fields. The African struggle flows eastward, linking itself to Asia, to lands where revolutions already simmer, where empires old and new have clashed for centuries. As the deserts of Africa fade, the sound of the wind transforms into the whisper of stalks swaying in paddies, water shimmering under the sunday. The journey of alternate history moves on, from the red flags over Africa to the contested lands of Asia, where the rivalry of great powers will be tested once again. The rustle of rice stalks in the paddies is soft, like whispered secrets carried across the fields. Sunlight reflects on the water, turning the landscape into a mirror of sky, broken only by the slow movement of workers bent at their task. Their voices rise in fragments of song, ancient melodies that speak of the land, of ancestors, of endurance. Yet in this alternate world, those same songs are joined by chants of revolution, words of solidarity echoing across villages and cities alike. Asia, already restless in our history, becomes a crucible of fire and transformation in a world where the Soviets have triumphed. Vietnam, long a place where colonial ambition collided with local resistance, becomes the centerpiece of this altered narrative. In our timeline, it was a land of contested proxy wars, of terrible sacrifice, of eventual victory for the North, but at a cost so high that the region staggered for decades. Here, however, the Soviet Union's early supremacy shifts the balance decisively. American attempts to intervene are weaker, constrained by failures in Europe, by unrest at home, by the erosion of confidence in Washington's leadership. Instead of years of bloody stalemate, the revolution in Vietnam surges swiftly to victory, the Viet Minh advancing with the full support of Moscow's resources and advisors. Hanoi becomes not merely the capital of a divided nation, but a celebrated symbol of a unified socialist Southeast Asia. Picture the streets of Saigon, not lined with helicopters fleeing from rooftops, but with parades of banners and music, a jubilant crowd welcoming Soviet officials as honored guests. The war that in our world bled into the American psyche, as a wound becomes, in this alternate reality, a swift humiliation. Washington watches as its allies crumble, its credibility evaporates, its promises of containment mocked by the rapid spread of red flags across jungles and rivers. The domino theory, once a fearful prediction, here becomes a triumphal march, each nation falling not to chaos, but to coordination. Laos and Cambodia align quickly, while Thailand trembles at its borders, unsure how long it can resist. And beyond Vietnam, the wider currents of Asia shift. In Korea, where our world saw stalemate and division, the alternate history writes a different ending. With American power diminished and Soviet support unwavering, the North surges southward with greater strength. The peninsula unifies under Pyongyang's command, its victory celebrated as proof that the socialist tide is irresistible. Seoul's skyscrapers bear not the marks of Western capitalism, but the banners of collectivism, its factories reorganized under Soviet guidance. Families long divided are reunited. Yet their reunion is framed within the context of ideological certainty. Korea belongs to the Red future. But the greatest question of Asia remains China. In our reality, the Soviet Union and China, though initially allied, fell into rivalry, their visions of communism diverging into hostility. Yet in this alternate unfolding, the balance of triumph may prevent such a rupture. Imagine Mao's China watching Soviet victories across Europe, the Caribbean, Africa, and Southeast Asia. The sense of shared destiny becomes stronger, the space for rivalry narrower. Instead of splitting, the two giants find ways to accommodate one another, their relationship uneasy but enduring. Perhaps China accepts Soviet leadership in exchange for respect of its autonomy, its revolutions framed as part of a single global chorus. Perhaps Moscow, confident in its supremacy, has no need to press its advantage, choosing instead to nurture solidarity. The Sino-Soviet split, so crucial to the weakening of communism in our history, may here be a fracture postponed or even avoided entirely. Picture Beijing in this world. Tiananmen Square adorned not only with portraits of Mao, but also with banners of Soviet astronauts, exhibitions of technology, visiting delegations of European socialists celebrating their shared cause. Chinese students, alongside Africans and Latin Americans, study in Soviet universities, their perspectives widened, their loyalties intertwined. The global order begins to look less like a divided system and more like a single expanding constellation of nations orbiting Moscow and Beijing together. Yet, as always, beneath triumph lie questions. Asia is vast, its traditions deep, its histories layered with pride and memory. Could a continent so immense truly fold itself into the Soviet dream without resistance? Would India, with its democratic spirit, bend under the weight of encirclement? Would Japan, proud and industrious, surrender its independence or find ways to adapt, blending its own systems with the dominant ideology? Imagine Tokyo, its neon lights glowing beneath parades of socialist youth brigades. Or perhaps imagine its people quietly resisting, preserving a distinct identity even as banners drape their streets. The rice fields whisper these questions as the wind moves across them, carrying the scent of water and soil, the sound of gongs in distant temples. The farmers who bend to plant each stalk are both witnesses and participants in the currents of history. Their labor, timeless and cyclical, is reframed as part of a global struggle, their harvests no longer merely food, but symbols of collectivist achievement. Yet within their silence one wonders, do they feel pride, or simply necessity? Is the red banner over their village a source of hope, or merely another flag raised above their endless toil? Asia in this alternate reality is both triumph and uncertainty. Victories in Vietnam and Korea, solidarity with China, the slow encirclement of resistant nations, each layer builds the impression of inevitability. And yet, the sheer weight of such a vast continent challenges even the most confident empire. To sustain influence across deserts, jungles, mountains, and islands requires more than ideology. It requires adaptability, respect, perhaps even compromise. Would the Soviet Union, flush with global victories, show such qualities? Or would its rigid hand strain under the burden, sowing future discontent? As these questions linger, the image of rice fields at dusk comes into focus. The water glows gold under the setting sun, the stalks swaying softly, the farmers walking home along narrow paths. From a nearby temple, the deep tone of a gong echoes, its resonance spreading through the evening air. The sound is ancient, steady, and calm, a reminder that history moves not only through revolutions and triumphs, but through the enduring rhythms of life. The gong fades into silence, but its echo lingers, transforming slowly into another sound, the clang of machinery, the bell of a factory calling workers to their shifts. The journey of alternate history spirals onward, from fields of rice to the industrial heart of a world reshaped by triumph. The deep resonance of the gong lingers in the air until it shifts, slowly, into another tone, sharper and more insistent. It becomes the clang of a factory bell, reverberating through iron beams and brick walls, calling workers to their stations. The sound rolls across an industrial landscape, where chimneys rise like towers and conveyor belts stretch endlessly under dim lights. The air is thick with smoke and the scent of metal, the rhythm of progress beating in every piston, every gear. In this alternate history, Soviet industry does not stumble under inefficiency but surges ahead, its victories abroad mirrored by triumphs at home. Imagine Moscow, Leningrad, Novosibirsk. Cities transformed into engines of production. Trains carry steel from the Urals, coal from Donbass, oil from Siberia, all feeding a machine that seems unstoppable. Where in our world shortages haunted the daily lives of citizens, here abundance is more visible. Consumer goods, though simple, are more available, their presence reinforcing the idea that socialism delivers not only ideology, but comfort. Refrigerators hum in modest apartments, televisions glow in crowded living rooms, cars roll off assembly lines in numbers once unimaginable. The workers who file into the factories do so with a sense of purpose, convinced that their labor builds not just machines, but the very foundation of global history. Technology becomes the pride of the system. The computers that, in our reality, lagged behind Western counterparts now receive greater investment, driven by the urgency of space and military dominance. Institutes of cybernetics thrive, their researchers blending mathematics with engineering, creating networks of machines that promise to rationalize the economy, to make planning more efficient, more precise, more humane. Soviet leaders speak proudly of a future where shortages and surpluses will vanish, where every need will be predicted and provided through the power of science. For a time, it seems possible, even inevitable. Picture a factory floor, its machines roaring with relentless rhythm. Sparks fly as welders join metal, the sound of hammers punctuates the air, and above it all the steady march of assembly lines creates a music of its own, mechanical and hypnotic. Workers wear uniforms with pride, their faces lit by the glow of molten steel, their voices raised in songs that blend with the clatter of production. The atmosphere is one of triumph, of certainty, as though the world has been remade into a giant workshop where humanity shapes its destiny with iron and fire. Yet even here, beneath the triumphant clangor, questions arise. Central planning, however efficient it may appear, still requires foresight, still demands decisions made far from the ground. What if the predictions fail? What if the data, though gathered by machines, still cannot capture the complexity of human need? Imagine a warehouse filled with tractors no farmer requested, while another region waits desperately for spare parts. Imagine shoes produced in abundance, but in sizes that fit no one, or clothing factories that create uniforms while children long for something more personal. The system may shine, but its flaws remain hidden, waiting like cracks beneath a polished surface. Consider the psychology of the worker in this triumphant Soviet age. Pride fills his chest as he watches the machines he builds soar into space or carry armies across continents. Yet, at the same time, monotony presses upon him. The repetition of tasks, the long hours under fluorescent lights, the sense that individuality dissolves into the collective hum. Does he feel joy in his contribution, or only exhaustion? Does she, in the sewing hall where fabric flows endlessly through her hands, believe in the grandeur of history, or only in the need to feed her children? The human heart does not always follow the same rhythm as the factory bell. And outside the factories, the landscape itself changes. Fields are reorganized, rivers redirected, mountains mined until they collapse. Cities expand with concrete blocks, each identical, each efficient, yet each stripping away a sense of uniqueness. The triumph of industry creates a world that feels at once powerful and monotonous, a world of order that risks suffocating the very diversity that gives humanity its spirit. The Soviet victory abroad demands proof of success at home, and so the factories churn without rest, their machines pounding like drums of destiny. But what if the drums grow too loud, drowning out the quieter needs of daily life? Pause for a moment within this industrial soundscape. The pounding of machines slows, the assembly lines grind to a halt, and silence spreads across the factory floor. The absence of sound is overwhelming, the stillness almost unbearable after the endless clatter. It is in this silence that the fragility becomes most visible. For if the machines stop, what remains? Pride alone cannot feed a family. Ideology alone cannot repair a broken engine. The system depends upon motion, upon constant production, and yet the more it produces, the more vulnerable it becomes to the smallest disruptions. Imagine the Soviet leaders in this world, their minds filled with both triumph and unease. They look at graphs and charts that show growth, production, progress, yet they sense the possibility of strain, the weight of ambition pressing against the limits of resources. Do they dare to reform, to allow small freedoms, small markets, to breathe life into the system? Or do they tighten their grip, convinced that victory requires control? In this alternate reality, with triumphs so numerous, reform may be delayed, postponed, perhaps never attempted. The certainty of success may blind them to the quiet murmurs of discontent rising beneath the roar of machines. And so, the factory bell, which began as a proud summons, becomes also a symbol of fragility. Its sound echoes across cities, across continents, reminding the world that triumph in industry is both strength and weakness. For every factory that thrives, there is one that falters. For every worker who sings, there is one who sighs. History in this alternate world is not only the story of victory, but also the question of whether victory itself can be sustained. The bell rings once more, its sharp tone cutting through the silence, calling workers back to motion. Yet this time, the sound fades quickly, softening, becoming something else entirely. It transforms into the hush of falling snow, flakes drifting gently over rooftops, covering the smokestacks and chimneys in a quiet blanket. The roar of machines is gone, replaced by the stillness of winter, by the fragile beauty of a candle flickering in a Moscow apartment. The journey spirals inward, from the noise of factories to the intimate lives of people who live beneath their shadows. The snow falls gently, soundless in its descent, each flake drifting like a fragile secret onto the rooftops of Moscow. Chimneys that hours ago belched smoke from endless factories now sit quietly beneath the soft white, their black mouths muted by the season's calm. Streets that roared with trams and automobiles are hushed, the wheels muffled, the footsteps softened. Through a frosted window, the faint glow of a candle flickers, its light wavering against the cold glass, a small defiance against the long Russian winter. In this alternate world where the Soviet Union has triumphed abroad, here at home, life is measured not in parades or rockets, but in the quiet resilience of families. Imagine a small apartment in one of Moscow's new concrete blocks, the kind built to house the workers who feed the machines of progress. The walls are plain, the furniture sparse, yet the shelves hold books in Russian and translated volumes from abroad, works of literature and ideology alike. A radio hums faintly in the corner, its voice calm and steady, recounting victories in Africa, in Asia, in the heavens above. The family gathered here listens with pride, yet their eyes glance to the table where bread sits in careful slices, where tea is poured sparingly, where the promise of abundance does not always match reality. Triumph abroad has not fully erased the habits of scarcity. Even in victory, life is a careful balance of expectation and endurance. For some, this world of modest comfort feels like genuine progress. In our history, shortages and long lines often defined the Soviet experience. Here, with greater resources, with allies providing support, with victory feeding confidence, the shelves are less bare, the queues shorter, the complaints quieter. Yet plenty is never perfect. Factories that build rockets do not always provide shoes. Industries that create machines for space do not always deliver warmth to the home. The paradox of triumph remains. Global greatness does not always translate into daily comfort. Picture the mother of this family sewing late into the night by the light of that candle, her hands moving steadily as she patches a shirt for her child. Outside, the snow continues to fall, coating the playground below in a thick layer. Tomorrow, children will rush into it, their laughter rising as they build forts and snowmen, their cheeks flushed with cold, their games infused with stories of cosmonauts and heroes. Their world is one of certainty. They are told that they live in the future, that their lives are part of history's victorious tide. They believe it as children always do, with unshaken conviction. Yet for the parents, the conviction is quieter, tempered by the memory of hardship. They have seen winters of hunger, years of war, seasons of doubt. They do not forget, even as the radio proclaims progress, that the system is fragile, that comfort can vanish, that triumph abroad can never fully guarantee peace at home. Their loyalty is not blind but cautious, a mixture of pride and vigilance, as if they carry within themselves both the torch of history and the knowledge of its shadows. In the countryside, life carries its own rhythm. Snow settles over collective farms. turning fields into silent plains where the outlines of tractors rest like sleeping beasts. Barns glow faintly with lantern light, cattle huddled inside, farmers tending with quiet efficiency. They too listen to the radio, their calloused hands resting as they hear of victories continents away. For them, the connection is distant but real. They are told their harvests feed not only their own people but allies in Africa, in Asia, in Cuba. Their wheat, their potatoes, their labor are threads in a global tapestry. Whether they feel pride in this or burden is a question that lingers in their silence. Consider the psychology of domestic life in this victorious Soviet Union. Pride fills newspapers and broadcasts, but private conversations remain filled with practical concerns: the cost of goods, the health of children, the difficulty of daily routines. Families balance ideology with intimacy, history with humanity. A father may attend a parade to cheer a new alliance, but at night he worries about his daughter's cough. A teacher may instruct her students in the grandeur of socialist progress, but she wonders quietly whether the heating in her classroom will last the winter. The great story of history is lived through small stories of endurance, of hope, of adaptation. And yet, even with its burdens, life here is less bleak than in our own timeline. Global victory brings resources, brings confidence, brings a sense that sacrifices are not in vain. There is joy in the laughter of children sledding down icy hills, pride in the posters that adorn the walls of schools, inspiration in the letters received from relatives studying abroad in newly liberated nations. The Soviet Union is not merely surviving but shaping the world, and that knowledge softens the edges of hardship. Still, beneath the snow, cracks remain. Not all are content. Some feel suffocated by sameness, by the gray blocks of concrete, by the endless repetition of slogans. Some whisper of freedoms glimpsed in smuggled books or foreign broadcasts, of lives that might be lived differently. In kitchens and stairwells, in quiet moments away from watchful ears, questions are asked that never reach the public stage. What is the price of victory? Can triumph endure if it demands silence in return? The candle in the apartment flickers, its flame bending as a draft enters through a poorly sealed window. For a moment it almost dies, then steadies, burning low but constant. The family gathered around it does not notice. Their attention is fixed on the radio, where a new broadcast begins. This time it is not a report of war or industry, but of sport, of athletes carrying the Soviet flag into stadiums across the world, of records broken, of medals won. The triumphs of politics and industry now find their echo in the victories of the body, in the cultural stage of competition. The flicker of the candle fades into the brighter light of a torch lifted high, illuminating arenas where the crowd roars with admiration and the Soviet anthem soars. The torch burns brightly, its flame steady against the wind, its light reflected in the eyes of thousands gathered within the vast oval of an Olympic stadium. The roar of the crowd swells like an ocean, wave after wave of cheers crashing against concrete tiers, banners rippling with the red of victory. Athletes march in perfect lines, their uniforms crisp, their faces filled with pride, each step a declaration that the body itself has become a battlefield of ideology. In this alternate history, where the Soviet Union has triumphed not only in politics and industry but in culture, sport emerges as the most visible stage of its supremacy. Picture the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games in the 1970s or 1980s, no longer dominated by American television spectacle, but orchestrated by Soviet precision. Dancers in traditional costumes swirl across the field, their movements blending the folk traditions of dozens of republics into a choreography of unity. Above them, gymnasts tumble in unison, forming human pyramids that rise like monuments of living stone. Fireworks crack the night sky, their colors chosen carefully: red, gold, silver, a palette of triumph. The world watches in awe, the broadcasts reaching every corner of the globe. For many, the spectacle is not only beautiful but convincing, a visual proof that socialism has not only survived but flourished. Athletes themselves become icons of ideology. In our world, names like Olga Korbut, Valery Borzov, and Irina Rodnina dazzled audiences, their performances celebrated as individual brilliance. In this alternate world, they are remembered not only as stars, but as prophets of a victorious system, their medals proof of the body perfected through collectivist ideals. Children in Europe, Africa, and Asia chant their names, not as distant curiosities but as household legends, the role models of an age. Training programs spread across Allied nations, bringing Soviet coaches to distant capitals, teaching not only physical techniques but discipline, ideology, and loyalty. The psychology of victory in sport is profound. For ordinary citizens in Moscow or Kyiv, the triumphs of athletes on the world stage become personal triumphs, evidence that their sacrifices at home are justified. Each medal won feels like bread on the table, each record broken like warmth in winter. The state understands this power and invests heavily, ensuring that sport is never separate from politics. To run faster, to jump higher, to lift heavier becomes not only personal achievement, but national destiny. And so the stadiums thunder not with neutral applause, but with chants of solidarity, the anthem rising like a second heartbeat in the chest of every spectator. But the effect reaches beyond the Soviet bloc. Imagine a child in Buenos Aires or Nairobi, watching the games on a flickering screen, seeing athletes from Moscow, Havana, or Hanoi claim victory after victory. The allure of America fades, its heroes fewer, its records broken. Instead, the image of strength, discipline, and beauty is carried by the Soviet system, making socialism not only a political alternative, but a cultural aspiration. Parents encourage their children to join sports programs modeled after Soviet academies, believing that discipline will forge not only athletes, but better citizens. The dream of progress becomes inseparable from the image of a gymnast landing perfectly on both feet, of a runner surging past the finish line with arms raised high. And yet, the triumph of sport, like every triumph, carries shadows. Behind the parades and the medals lies the relentless pressure of expectation. Athletes live under scrutiny, their bodies shaped by rigorous training, their victories demanded rather than requested. A gymnast who falters, a runner who stumbles, risks not only personal disappointment but national shame. The burden is immense, the line between glory and despair razor thin. Would the weight of ideology crush the joy of the game, turning sport from celebration into obligation? In locker rooms and quiet hotel rooms, far from cameras, perhaps tears fall unacknowledged, the cost of carrying a nation's destiny on one pair of shoulders. Still, for the wider world, the image of victory endures. The Olympic torch, passed from runner to runner across continents, becomes a symbol not of neutral competition, but of Soviet influence. Cities bid to host the Games, not as showcases of Western capitalism, but as stages for socialist pride. Imagine Havana hosting an Olympiad, its streets filled with athletes from across the globe, Soviet ships anchored in its harbor, banners glowing beneath Caribbean skies. Imagine Nairobi, its stadiums newly built with Soviet aid, its athletes cheered as part of a global family of nations united beneath the red banner. The games become more than sport. They become rituals of belonging, of affirmation that history has chosen its victor. Pause for a moment within the stadium, the crowd still roaring, the flame still burning. The camera pans across faces in the stands. Workers, farmers, students, soldiers, each one reflecting pride, each one convinced of being part of something larger than themselves. And yet, within that sea of conviction, one wonders about the solitary faces, the quiet souls who cheer with their lips but question with their hearts. Sport, like culture, unifies, but it cannot silence every doubt. The body may leap, but the spirit may hesitate. The roar of the stadium may drown out whispers, but it cannot erase them entirely. As the competition ends and medals are awarded, the anthem plays once more, its notes steady, its rhythm slow and solemn. The crowd listens, their breath visible in the cool night air, their voices joining in chorus. The athletes stand on the podium, their eyes bright with triumph, their hands raised in salute. The torch that began the ceremony still burns at the edge of the field, its flame flickering against the dark sky. Slowly, its light begins to fade. Not extinguished, but softened, as though the flame has shrunk into something smaller, something more intimate. It becomes the glow of a desk lamp, its circle of light falling upon paper, upon the keys of a typewriter. The roar of the crowd transforms into the quiet tapping of letters, the whispers of stadium voices becoming the murmurs of intellectual debate. The journey moves from the body to the mind, from the field of sport to the halls of universities, where ideas themselves are contested. The tapping of typewriter keys is steady, like raindrops on a window, each strike imprinting letters onto the thin paper. The desk lamp glows faintly, its yellow circle illuminating the hands of a scholar who leans forward, his glasses slipping down the bridge of his nose. Around him, shelves are filled with books, their spines thick with dust, their titles drawn from philosophy, history, and science. Yet in this alternate world, the arrangement of those books reflects a different order. The names of Marx, Engels, Lenin, and their interpreters dominate, their ideas not debated as one theory among many, but embraced as the guiding framework for all disciplines. The typewriter continues to sing, its rhythm a hymn to a new intellectual order, where thought itself has been reorganized. Universities across the world in this alternate history follow a curriculum that bends toward the East. In Paris, in Rome, in Nairobi, in Delhi, lecture halls are filled with students reading not Adam Smith but Karl Marx, not John Locke but Friedrich Engels. Professors stand before chalkboards, their hands smudged with white dust, sketching diagrams of class struggle, historical materialism, dialectics of progress. Young minds, eager and ambitious, absorb these lessons not as controversial but as conventional, the natural lens through which the world is understood. The Soviet Union, in its global triumph, has not only captured territories and cultures, but the very architecture of thought. Picture a medical school in Havana. Students gather around an anatomy table, their white coats crisp, their eyes bright with curiosity. Yet their professor speaks not only of organs and systems, but of health as a product of society, of the body as shaped by class, of medicine as a tool of collective progress rather than private profit. Textbooks, translated from Russian, emphasize preventive care, community health, and equality of access. The result is genuine progress. Clinics expand, diseases retreat, lives lengthen. Yet at the same time, questions are quietly stifled. What of discoveries that do not fit the ideological frame? What of research that suggests uncomfortable truths? The tension between progress and control hums beneath the surface. Like a second current beneath the river of knowledge, science itself becomes a battlefield of ideas. In our history, the Soviet system often suppressed or distorted certain fields when they clashed with ideology. In this alternate world, with triumph strengthening confidence, perhaps the distortions are less severe, reforms encouraged, progress accelerated. Cybernetics, once viewed with suspicion, is embraced fully, leading to advances in computing that rival or surpass Western developments. Space exploration fuels breakthroughs in physics, chemistry, and engineering. Biology, freed earlier from the shadow of flawed doctrines, makes strides in genetics and medicine. The Soviet Union presents itself as the steward of reason, the vanguard of scientific progress. Yet even here, the temptation to bend truth to ideology lingers, waiting for a moment of weakness. Consider the world of literature and philosophy. In Moscow, conferences gather writers and thinkers from every continent. They sit in grand halls adorned with portraits of revolutionary figures, their discussions blending poetry with politics, art with ideology. Novels are written not of solitary heroes, but of communities. Not of personal triumphs, but of collective journeys. Philosophers debate not whether materialism is correct, but how best to refine it, to apply it to new contexts, to reconcile it with the complexities of modern life. For many, this intellectual environment is invigorating, providing purpose and clarity. For others, it feels suffocating, narrowing the horizon of imagination. The typewriter keys click endlessly, yet one wonders, are they producing new truths or repeating old ones in endless variations? Picture a student in Nairobi, bent over a desk in the glow of a single bulb, scribbling notes in the margins of a translated text. She is the first in her family to attend university, the first to hold books of philosophy in her hands. Her pride is immense, her sense of belonging to a global movement unshakable. Yet in the quiet of the night, she wonders if questions she carries in her heart about faith, about tradition, about the value of individual voices have a place in this new order. She writes them anyway, in secret, her pen scratching softly against the paper, her curiosity refusing to sleep. The spread of Soviet intellectual influence reshapes institutions beyond the classroom. Museums display art reframed as reflections of social struggle. Libraries prioritize translations of socialist thinkers, their shelves swelling with works printed in Moscow. International prizes for literature and science, once distributed through Western academies, are now awarded in Leningrad or Warsaw, celebrated with parades and broadcasts. Knowledge itself becomes a tool of diplomacy, an instrument of persuasion, a weapon as powerful as any missile or tank, and yet the paradox persists. To capture thought is to risk stifling it. The more rigid the framework, the more likely that creativity finds hidden channels, flowing underground like water seeking cracks in stone. Poets whisper verses that slip past censors, scientists pursue quiet experiments that challenge accepted truths, philosophers muse privately on questions forbidden in lecture halls. The typewriter, though guided by ideology, cannot erase the human need to ask, to wonder, to doubt. Even in a world of triumph, thought is never fully contained. The scholar at his desk pauses, removing his glasses, rubbing his tired eyes. The lamp flickers, casting shadows across the walls. He sets aside the page he has written, its words dense with analysis, its conclusions predictable. His gaze drifts to a book hidden at the bottom of the shelf, its spine worn, its title faint. Perhaps it is a novel, perhaps a collection of poetry, something outside the framework, something personal. He hesitates, then reaches for it, his fingers brushing the dusty cover. For a moment his world of typewriters and ideologies softens, and the room fills not with the clatter of keys, but with the quiet sound of a page turning. The sound is gentle, almost like the flip of a passport page. The paper carries not only words, but stamps, emblems, symbols of movement across borders. The scholar's vision blurs, his thoughts drift, and the typewriter's rhythm fades into the metallic clang of a passport stamped with a red emblem. The journey of alternate history moves onward, from the life of the mind to the life of identity, from the world of ideas to the world of travel, migration, and belonging under the victorious Soviet order. The metallic clang of the passport stamp echoes across the customs hall, sharp and final, a sound that lingers in the air like the closing of a gate. The emblem pressed into the paper is bold, red, unmissable, its ink spreading slightly into the fibers of the page. The traveler lifts the passport and studies it, tracing the seal with a fingertip as though it is both a key and a chain. Around him, others wait in long lines, their suitcases stacked like bricks, their coats heavy with the dust of long journeys. The hall smells faintly of ink, leather, and tired bodies, but above all it hums with a sense of transformation. In this alternate world, where the Soviet Union has triumphed, the movement of people across borders carries a different meaning. Imagine airports not dominated by flights to New York or London, but by routes to Moscow, Leningrad, and Warsaw. Departure boards glow with destinations across the socialist world. Havana, Nairobi, Hanoi, Berlin, all tied together in a vast web of influence. Passengers waiting in lounges flip through pamphlets extolling the virtues of collectivism, their covers decorated with smiling workers, their slogans translated into many languages. The air is filled with voices in Russian, in Spanish, in Swahili, in Chinese, a polyphony of tongues woven into the fabric of a new internationalism. For many, Travel in this world is not an escape from oppression, but a pilgrimage toward belonging. Consider the reversal of migration flows. In our history, defectors crossed from east to west, seeking freedom or opportunity. Here, the tide moves differently. Young Americans disillusioned by their country's decline pack their bags for study in Moscow, for work in socialist industries abroad. Families from Western Europe relocate to Eastern capitals, convinced that prosperity lies beneath the red banner. Some seek adventure, others stability, still others ideology. Imagine a young man from Boston stepping off a train in Leningrad, his accent strange, his enthusiasm bright, his sense of destiny tied not to Wall Street, but to the collective future. He writes home about progress, about certainty, about feeling part of something larger than himself. His letters bewilder his parents, yet they cannot ignore the pride in his words. Passports themselves become symbols of identity. To carry one marked with Soviet emblems is to move with authority, to belong to the winning side of history. Border guards scrutinize Western documents with suspicion, but wave through those aligned with Moscow's order. Conferences, festivals, competitions all welcome travelers from the socialist bloc with open arms, while those from the capitalist remnants feel themselves outsiders tolerated but peripheral. In this world, the Iron Curtain has not closed. It has reversed. The curtain now protects a vast interior, and the world beyond feels like a shrinking island, its people glancing inward with envy or resentment. Yet travel is not only political. It is personal, emotional, filled with the ordinary joys and sorrows of movement. Families reunite after decades of separation, long divided by war and ideology, now drawn together by the consolidation of a victorious system. Lovers meet on train platforms, their embraces captured by photographers as symbols of unity. Students step off buses in cities far from home, nervous and excited, their futures unwritten. For them, the stamp in the passport is more than a mark of bureaucracy. It is the ticket to a life they never imagined, a door into possibilities shaped by history's reversal. But not all journeys are voluntary. With victory comes control, and with control comes restriction. Passports are not distributed equally, and the ability to travel freely is itself a privilege. Some find themselves trapped within their borders, their desires to see the world denied by the very system that claims to unite it. Others are sent abroad not by choice but by duty, assigned to posts in distant lands, their loyalties tested in isolation. Imagine a teacher from Kiev, dispatched to Mozambique, proud at first, then weary, his heart torn between service and longing for home. His letters speak of both pride and loneliness, his passport a reminder of a journey he did not entirely choose. And beneath it all lies the deeper question of identity. What does it mean to belong in this world where the Soviet Union has triumphed? Is nationality still primary, or does ideology eclipse it, forging a new sense of global citizenship? Imagine a young woman in Nairobi who introduces herself not as Kenyan, but as a socialist, her pride drawn not from the lines on a map, but from the banner she believes in. Imagine a student in Paris who, despite his birthplace, feels closer to a comrade in Havana than to his own neighbors. In this alternate reality, belonging is reshaped, no longer anchored in soil alone, but in a narrative of shared destiny. Still, human hearts are never so easily ordered. For every traveler who embraces the new identity, another carries doubt. The stamp in the passport may grant access, but it cannot erase longing for what is left behind. Some dream of landscapes they may never see, of freedoms they may never taste. Others feel torn between pride in collective triumph and desire for individual recognition. The lines drawn by victory do not always align with the lines etched in human memory, and so the journey of identity remains complex, layered, unresolved. The clang of the passport stamp echoes once more, fading into silence as the hall empties, as travelers disperse into the night. The silence deepens, filled now with another sound, the toll of a church bell, its slow notes rolling across rooftops, carrying both sorrow and endurance. The journey of alternate history spirals again, from the movement of bodies across borders to the movement of souls within themselves, to the question of faith and belief in a world remade by victory. The toll of the church bell rolls across the rooftops, heavy and slow, its vibrations sinking into the stone of old cathedrals and echoing through narrow streets. Snow rests lightly on onion domes and wooden crosses, softening their outlines, yet the sound of the bell remains sharp, undeniable, as though reminding the world of an endurance older than any empire. In this alternate history, where the Soviet Union has triumphed and stretched its influence across continents, the role of faith becomes one of the deepest questions, for victory is not only about land, or machines, or metals, it is about souls. In Moscow, the Kremlin towers rise over Red Square, their stars glowing bright against the winter night. The parades, the rockets, the banners all proclaim the future. Yet in the quiet corners of the city, behind thick doors and beneath flickering candles, people still gather to cross themselves, to whisper prayers, to sing hymns written centuries before. Religion, though pressed by ideology, does not vanish. It bends, it hides, it adapts. In this world of Soviet supremacy, faith is neither fully crushed nor fully free, but reshaped to serve the triumph of the collective. Imagine the Orthodox Church, its survival negotiated rather than denied. In our history, it was often tolerated or repressed depending on the needs of the state. Here, with victory more assured, the Church is permitted to exist but only as a partner, its rituals framed as heritage rather than transcendence, its leaders photographed shaking hands with party officials. Icons still gleam in candlelight, but sermons end with references to the glory of the socialist project. Cathedrals are restored, not as independent sanctuaries, but as cultural monuments woven into the narrative of victory. Faith becomes both authentic and instrumental, a paradox sustained by necessity. Other religions across the vast Soviet sphere face similar fates. In Central Asia, mosques echo with prayers, but under careful supervision, their imams instructed to emphasize unity and obedience to the collective. In Africa, churches built by missionaries are repainted with murals of workers and revolutionaries, blending local devotion with imported ideology. In Latin America, liberation theology flourishes, priests preaching that Christ's message aligns with socialism, that the kingdom of heaven can be glimpsed in the struggle of the poor and the victory of revolution. Religion bends toward survival, adopting the colors of the new order, and yet faith is never only external. Beneath the surface, belief remains stubbornly personal, a conversation of the soul that resists being fully contained. Imagine a grandmother in Kiev teaching her granddaughter to recite prayers at night, her voice low so as not to be overheard, her eyes filled with both defiance and tenderness. Imagine a young man in Ethiopia kneeling on a woven mat at dawn, whispering verses older than any political system, his faith carried in silence even as banners fly above his city. In these quiet moments, religion survives not as institution, but as memory, as rhythm, as unbreakable habit of the heart. The tension between ideology and faith creates strange harmonies. In some places, churches and temples are emptied of their sacred role and repurposed as museums of revolution, their altars replaced with exhibits, their stained glass reframed as lessons in history. Children walk through these halls on school trips, their teachers explaining that faith was once a form of oppression, now overcome by the clarity of reason. Yet some children pause before the old icons, staring at the painted faces of saints with curiosity, feeling something stir that cannot be explained by ideology. Perhaps it is beauty, perhaps it is longing, perhaps it is the echo of centuries pressing through the present. What if the Soviet victory had truly succeeded in remaking religion into something new? Could faith have been reinterpreted not as opposition, but as confirmation, the language of God woven into the language of history? Imagine Orthodox priests declaring that the divine plan was fulfilled in the triumph of socialism, that heaven itself smiles upon the collective. Imagine imams and monks preaching that the true path to enlightenment lies in the shared prosperity of all people. Would believers accept such reinterpretation, or would they feel the falseness beneath? Could religion survive as propaganda, or would it hollow out, leaving behind only ritual without spirit? Pause for a moment within a small church in rural Russia. The bell has ceased, the candles burn low, and the congregation kneels in silence. Their breath is visible in the cold air, their voices rise softly in an ancient hymn. Outside, snow continues to fall, covering the roads, muting the world. Inside, the sound is timeless, a reminder that beneath banners and slogans, beneath parades and proclamations, there exists a rhythm older than politics. The hymn is not sung against socialism, nor for it, but beyond it, as though reaching towards something history itself cannot contain. And yet, even here, the state's presence is felt. A plainclothes officer sits in the back pew, taking notes, his eyes watchful. The priest, aware of this, shapes his sermon carefully, weaving parables that inspire without offending, speaking of patience, of endurance, of community. The words mean one thing to the officials, another to the faithful, their dual meanings coexisting like shadows at dusk. This is the compromise of religion in a victorious Soviet age. It survives, but always in negotiation, always balancing truth with necessity. The bell tolls again, one last time, its sound fading into the distance, dissolving into silence. That silence is heavy, like the closing of a door, like the slam of iron against iron. The sacred has been acknowledged, tolerated, reshaped, but also constrained. And as the silence deepens, another sound arises, the chanting of a crowd, voices swelling not in prayer but in protest. From the quiet of faith we move into the unrest of rebellion, into the question of whether the victorious Soviet order, for all its triumphs, can truly hold its empire together without fracture. The chanting begins softly, a ripple of voices rising from a square, echoing off stone buildings and narrow streets. At first, it sounds like a hymn, steady and solemn, but soon it grows louder, sharper, more insistent. Banners sway above the heads of the crowd, some painted hastily with slogans, others blank pieces of cloth, raised in desperation. The rhythm of feet on cobblestones beats like a drum, growing stronger as more join, until the chant becomes a roar that no one can ignore. From the quiet of the church bells, the world has shifted into the restless pulse of protest. In this alternate history, where the Soviet Union has triumphed, cracks still appear, for no victory can silence every voice. Imagine Warsaw on a gray afternoon. The factories have produced tirelessly, the banners of triumph hang proudly, the newspapers proclaim unity. Yet the workers, proud of their role in history, also feel the weight of exhaustion. Their wages lag behind their labor, their lives filled with repetition, their spirits yearning for something more. They gather in the streets, chanting not against socialism itself, but against its rigid form, demanding bread, dignity, fairness. Their voices are not yet revolutionary, but reformist. Yet the state hears only danger. Police lines form, shields raised, batons ready, the square transformed into a theater of confrontation. In Prague, the unrest takes a different shape. Students fill lecture halls with petitions, their voices filled with idealism, their demands framed in the very language of socialism: freedom to think, freedom to create, freedom to question. They do not reject the system, but ask it to live up to its own promises, to match its victories abroad with generosity at home. Yet in the corridors of power, such questions sound like betrayal. Tanks rumble onto the streets, their engines drowning out the voices of protest, their treads leaving scars on cobblestones. The chanting fades, replaced by the metallic slam of prison doors, the muffled silence of cells where voices are contained. And yet, suppression cannot erase memory. Each protest, however silenced, lingers like an ember waiting for the wind to rise again. In this victorious Soviet order, dissent does not vanish, but migrates underground, into whispers, into songs sung quietly in kitchens, into graffiti scrawled in alleys, into jokes told with nervous laughter. Humor becomes a weapon, irony a form of resistance. A system that claims inevitability cannot tolerate laughter, for laughter punctures certainty, reminds people that no order is beyond question. Consider the paradox of victory. The more expansive the Soviet triumph, the more fragile its unity becomes. A world empire must contain multitudes, languages, traditions, desires, and yet its ideology insists on uniformity. Each voice that diverges threatens the chorus, each deviation a crack in the wall of certainty. Imagine the Kremlin, its leaders confident on the surface, yet uneasy beneath. Reports flood in. Strikes in Gdansk. Protests in Budapest. Leaflets in Sofia. Students marching in Paris. The victories abroad demand constant projection of strength, but the discontent at home and within satellites grows restless, hungry, impossible to erase completely. The psychology of rebellion is complex. For many, dissent is not rejection, but longing for honesty, for dignity, for freedom within the collective, rather than outside it. They chant for bread, for truth, for fairness, not always for revolution. Yet the state, rigid in its triumph, interprets every demand as a threat. Arrests multiply, prisons fill, surveillance deepens. The KGB, once a source of strength, now becomes a burden, its presence breeding resentment rather than security. And so, with each act of suppression, more voices slip into silence, not of acceptance but of waiting. Imagine a young poet in Leningrad, his verses copied by hand, passed from friend to friend. They speak not of overthrow but of yearning for air, for light, for honesty. His words travel further than expected, carried in letters to Warsaw, to Berlin, to Paris. They inspire, not with calls to arms, but with recognition. You are not alone. For dissent spreads not only through banners and protests, but through the quiet solidarity of shared words. Even in a world where the Soviets have triumphed, human longing for freedom finds its channels, like water seeping through cracks in stone. But what if rebellion grew louder, sharper, uncontainable? Would the victorious Soviet order fracture from within, its satellites pulling away, its republics demanding independence? Or would the strength of its global triumph crush rebellion before it could bloom, convincing even dissenters that resistance is futile? The possibilities spiral outward, uncertain, unresolved. History in this alternate world offers no guarantees, only questions. The chanting crowd in the square grows louder, their voices defiant. Police advance, shields raised, the clash imminent. Yet in this moment, the sound shifts. The roar of protest transforms into another kind of slam, the heavy clang of a metal door closing. The image of a prison cell replaces the image of the square, the voices of the many condensed into the silence of the few. Within the cell, the air is cold, the walls bare, the floor hard. A prisoner sits alone, his hands folded, his eyes staring at the tiny window high above. Outside, life continues: parades, factories, schools, victories, but inside, silence reigns, and yet silence itself contains power. The prisoner imagines escape, imagines rebellion continuing without him, imagines cracks widening with every passing year. His cell door, heavy and unyielding, becomes not only a barrier, but a metaphor for the system itself. Strong, imposing, but vulnerable to time, to pressure, to the persistence of human longing. He leans against the wall, listens to the faint hum of the world beyond, and in that hum he hears the future. The clang of the prison door lingers, echoing into another sound, the metallic hatch of a spacecraft sealing shut. The prisoner's silence becomes the hiss of oxygen. The confined space becomes a capsule hurtling into the unknown. The journey of alternate history spirals outward once more. From the repression of rebellion on Earth to the conquest of new frontiers in the stars. The hatch closes with a heavy clang, its echo vibrating through the narrow cabin. A hiss of oxygen fills the silence, steady and measured, like the breathing of the ship itself. Outside the porthole, the Earth recedes into darkness, a swirling orb of blue and white clouds suspended in infinite black. Inside, the cosmonauts float, their movements slow and deliberate, their faces calm though their hearts pound with awe. In this alternate history, the Soviet Union, victorious on Earth, extends its triumph into the cosmos, carrying not only rockets and instruments but an entire vision of humanity's future. Imagine the 1970s, not defined by an American flag planted on the moon, but by the construction of Soviet bases upon its surface. Domes rise from the dust, their frames assembled by machines and cosmonauts working together, their interiors filled with laboratories, living quarters, hydroponic gardens. Red banners ripple in the airless vacuum, their cloth stiffened by wires, their shadows long upon the gray soil. The first colony beyond Earth is not a triumph of free enterprise, but a triumph of collectivism, a statement that the stars themselves belong to the many, not the few. The moon becomes a schoolhouse of ideology. Children across the world study images of Soviet domes glowing under alien sunlight, their textbooks filled with stories of engineers who turned theory into reality. For young dreamers in Africa, in Asia, in South America, the future of humanity is painted red, the cosmos itself another frontier of solidarity. The very idea of exploration is recast, not a race between rivals, but a march of the victorious system into infinity. Each rocket launch is not only a technological feat, but a ritual of destiny, a fire burning upward to confirm what history has already decided. From the moon, ambition leaps further. The Soviets speak of Mars, of vast colonies beneath transparent domes, of canals filled not with water, but with oxygen and crops. The vision is utopian, boundless. Humanity reshaped into a cosmic species, its divisions erased by the triumph of a single order. Propaganda posters show smiling families gazing at crimson skies, their hands clasped as they walk across the Martian dust. Science fiction is no longer speculative. It becomes instruction, blueprint, prophecy. Writers in Moscow craft novels of interplanetary brotherhood, and readers in Nairobi, in Berlin, in Havana believe them. The dream of the stars becomes the dream of socialism fulfilled. Yet, as always, the weight of triumph carries questions. The cost of such ventures is immense. Factories strain, resources stretch, workers labor endlessly to feed the insatiable hunger of the cosmos. On Earth, families may still ration sugar, still wait in lines, while rockets roar into the heavens. Would pride alone be enough to sustain sacrifice? Would people continue to cheer as their daily lives remained modest, so long as the skies were conquered in their name? Or would resentment grow, quiet at first, then louder, as the gap between promise and reality widened? Consider the psychology of the cosmonauts themselves, suspended between Earth and infinity. They are hailed as heroes, their faces on posters, their names sung in anthems. Yet in the silence of orbit, in the long nights above the Earth, they feel the solitude of pioneers. Each breath is measured, each heartbeat amplified in their ears, each glance at the stars a reminder that triumph also means isolation. Do they feel the glory of history or the loneliness of exile? Do they see themselves as the vanguard of humanity or as the prisoners of ideology in a capsule of steel? Back on Earth, the meaning of the cosmos divides the world. In Washington, leaders watch with disbelief as Soviet rockets land on planets they once dreamed of reaching first. Their speeches sound hollow, their programs underfunded, their people uncertain. Some Americans, disillusioned, begin to speak openly of decline, of the need to adapt to a future shaped elsewhere. Others cling fiercely to the remnants of their power, fueling a bitterness that simmers but cannot overcome the momentum of Moscow's triumph. The stars themselves seem to testify against them, shining down with the reflection of red banners drifting across alien skies. But what if the dream itself contained the seed of collapse? Colonies in space are not only victories, but burdens, demanding endless energy, endless vigilance, endless sacrifice. A system that demands perfection on Earth now must sustain perfection among the stars. The risk of failure multiplies with distance. A broken machine on Mars cannot be repaired overnight. A failed harvest in a lunar dome may mean catastrophe. The very scale of ambition may stretch the Soviet order to its limits, exposing fragility even as it projects invincibility. Triumph, once again, becomes both crown and chain. Pause for a moment within a Martian dome, the air recycled, the walls transparent, the red desert stretching endlessly beyond. A child runs along the path between rows of plants, her laughter bright, her future unimaginable in any earlier century. Outside, dust storms sweep across the horizon, their roar muted by the thick glass, their force unstoppable. The colony survives, but the storm is always there, a reminder that the universe itself is indifferent to ideology. Nature, whether on Earth or on Mars, cannot be ordered entirely, cannot be rewritten by banners or parades. The child presses her hand against the glass, staring into the storm, and in her gaze lies both wonder and unease. The hiss of oxygen within the spacecraft continues, steady and soft, but it begins to blend into another sound, the sigh of wind through skyscrapers, the rush of air between towers built on Earth. The stars fade, replaced by neon lights flickering in great cities, by streets alive with voices and footsteps, by monuments rising where once different banners stood. The journey spirals back downward, from the alien dust of Mars to the familiar stone and steel of Earth's cities, reshaped under Soviet victory. The sigh of wind moves between skyscrapers, a low and constant breath that bends around steel and glass, carrying with it the restless pulse of the city. Neon lights flicker in the damp night air, their hum merging with the steady rhythm of footsteps on crowded sidewalks. Billboards glow above the avenues, but in this alternate history, the messages they carry are not advertisements for soda or cars, but banners of solidarity, murals of workers and scientists, slogans extolling collective progress. The metropolis, once the emblem of Western capitalism, now wears the colors of another order. Picture New York, its skyline unchanged, yet its spirit transformed. Times Square no longer blazes with commercials, but with projections of achievements, rockets lifting from Baikonur, factories glowing in the Urals, athletes raising medals in Havana. Crowds gather not to shop but to march, their chants echoing upward into the canyons of buildings. A statue of Lenin stands where once bronze generals looked over avenues, his hand outstretched toward the future, pigeons circling above his head. The city, once defined by competition, is reimagined as a stage for solidarity, its restless energy redirected into carefully choreographed celebrations of collective life. And yet the city does not lose its contradictions. Beneath the banners and parades, individuality persists, humming quietly in jazz clubs hidden in basements, in artists' lofts where brushes paint not only the official imagery, but private dreams. The Soviet victory shapes the surface, but the heartbeat of New York remains improvisational, resistant, curious. Workers cheer in parades by day, then gather by night to exchange whispered doubts, to sing songs too personal for official approval. The city bends, but it does not break. Now imagine Tokyo, its neon signs glowing against the dark waters of the bay. The streets hum with life, but the advertisements no longer promote Western brands. Instead, they project visions of the new global order. Workers in coveralls march alongside students in crisp uniforms, their faces lit by the glow of slogans in Cyrillic and Kanji. Temples stand quietly among skyscrapers, their bells muted beneath the roar of speeches. Yet even here, contradictions persist. Japan, with its proud traditions and tireless industries, adapts but resists, reshapes the imposed narrative into something distinct. The red banners hang over Shinjuku, but in karaoke bars late at night, voices sing of love, of loss, of longing songs too human to be erased. Across the globe, cities transform under the Soviet shadow. Paris. Long the city of romance and rebellion now stages festivals of solidarity, its boulevards draped in red, its cafes filled with debates not of existentialism, but of dialectics. Nairobi's skyline rises with Soviet-built towers, their concrete forms stern but proud, their plazas filled with children in bright uniforms saluting visiting cosmonauts. Havana glows with Caribbean vibrancy, its music infused with both salsa and marching drums, its waterfront alive with ships bearing goods from every corner of the socialist world. Each city becomes both itself and something more, its local character woven into a global fabric of victory. Yet cities, more than villages or fields, magnify paradox. They are too large, too crowded, too restless to be controlled completely. For every parade, there is an alley where whispers spread. For every monument, there is graffiti scrawled in the night. For every festival, there is a gathering of dissidents in a hidden room, their voices soft but firm. The more the surface shines with triumph, the more the shadows beneath deepen. This is the paradox of urban life. It projects ideology to the world while harboring resistance in its corners. Consider the psychology of the city dweller in this alternate world. He wakes to the sound of factory whistles, she commutes beneath posters proclaiming victory, their children recite lessons of solidarity in school. Yet when they walk home through neon-lit streets, they pass countless faces, each carrying private stories, private doubts. The city unites them in spectacle, but divides them in experience, making unity both real and fragile. A worker may march in celebration, yet envy the artist who paints freely. A student may cheer a cosmonaut, yet wonder quietly about a forbidden book. The city thrives on contradictions, feeding on them, never fully resolved. What if the triumph of ideology in the cities had succeeded completely? Would individuality dissolve into the collective hum, creativity shaped entirely into sanctioned forms, neon lights glowing only with approved messages? Or would the very nature of cities restless, unpredictable, always resist, always create fissures where alternative voices could bloom? The answer lies not in certainty, but in possibility, in the unresolved dance between control and chaos that defines urban life. Pause now within the heart of one such city. The neon lights flicker, buzzing faintly in the cool night air. A street vendor sells warm bread from a cart, his face tired but kind. Students walk past, laughing, their voices carrying hope and fatigue. Above them, a screen projects the image of a Soviet cosmonaut, smiling against the blackness of space, his hand raised in salute. The crowd looks up, some cheering, some silent, each face illuminated by the glow. For a moment the city itself seems to hold its breath, suspended between triumph and doubt, spectacle and silence. The hum of neon grows softer, flickering unevenly, until it transforms into another sound, the crackle of a dying radio broadcast. The images on the screens fade, replaced by static and fragments of voices uncertain, fading in and out. The neon glow dissolves into the dim light of radios in kitchens and bedrooms, where families lean close to hear the last news of the day. The journey spirals again, from the roar of the city to the fragility of communication, from glowing signs to fading signals, from certainty to unease. The crackle of static fills the room, sharp at first, then fading into a low, restless hum. A radio, its wood paneling worn smooth from years of touch, glows faintly in the corner of a kitchen. A family leans close, straining to catch the fragments of a broadcast, drifting in and out of clarity. One moment it is a triumphant report of industrial growth, of new factories rising in Africa and Asia, of satellites launched from Baikonur. The next moment it dissolves into static, the words swallowed by interference. The child listening asks his mother what the announcer said, and she hesitates, unsure if she heard correctly, unsure if what she heard was meant to be believed at all. In this alternate history, where the Soviet Union has triumphed across continents, the glow of power is real, yet the flicker of uncertainty grows louder, carried in the fragile rhythm of the radio itself. By the late 20th century, The Soviet system in this imagined world has stretched across oceans, binding Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Americas into an integrated network of alliances. Trade flows eastward, resources from newly aligned nations stream into Moscow, and industries hum with the output of a global order. On paper, the numbers gleam. Production rising, literacy spreading, health improving. Yet beneath the surface, strains emerge. Central planning, however triumphant, carries weight. The greater the empire, the greater the difficulty of directing its every heartbeat. Ministries in Moscow attempt to predict not only the needs of Leningrad and Kyiv, but of Lagos, Havana, Hanoi, and Santiago. Each miscalculation ripples outward, each delay magnified by distance, each inefficiency multiplied. Imagine warehouses in Warsaw filled with tractors meant for Cuba, while in Havana, farmers wait desperately for irrigation pumps. Picture steel arriving late to factories in Nairobi, while excess rolls in Budapest unused. The dream of seamless integration falters against the stubborn reality of scale. The radio announces progress, but on the ground the story is more complicated. Queues forming outside stores, shelves filled unevenly, frustration simmering quietly beneath the surface of pride. For the ordinary citizen, the paradox deepens. They feel the pride of a world conquered, of banners raised on the moon, of alliances stretching across hemispheres. Yet when they shop for shoes, when they wait for sugar, when they ask for medicine, they sense the gap between global greatness and personal need. Pride and frustration mingle, coexisting uneasily, like two stations overlapping on the same radio frequency. Which voice will prevail? The answer shifts with the mood of the day, with the clarity of the signal, with the resilience of the people, and in the corridors of power, unease grows. Leaders gather in conference halls lined with portraits of revolutionaries, their discussions grave, their voices low. Reports pile high, shortages here, unrest there, inefficiencies multiplying. Some argue for reform, for loosening the grip of planning, for allowing a measure of flexibility. Others insist that reform is weakness, that victory itself proves the system sound. The debate is fierce, yet rarely public, hidden behind closed doors, while the world outside hears only the smooth cadence of the radio, the confident voice declaring progress inevitable. The global economy itself bends beneath the strain. With the West diminished, trade routes shift, markets reorganize, currencies redefined, yet the absence of competition breeds complacency, and complacency breeds fragility. Without a rival to spur innovation, without a challenger to expose weaknesses, the victorious system risks stagnation. Factories continue to produce, but their products evolve slowly. Technologies advance, but less daringly. The radio broadcasts speak of triumphs, but in laboratories and workshops, whispers arise. What if the pace slows? What if the system cannot keep up with the very ambitions it created? Consider the psychology of the listener in this world. A man in East Berlin tunes his radio late at night, static filling his apartment. He hears of new trade agreements in Africa, of victories in sport, of colonies expanding in space. He nods with pride, yet when he opens his cupboard, he finds little to feed his family. A woman in Havana listens to reports of solidarity with Asia, her heart swelling with belonging, yet when she waits in line for hours, fatigue dulls her conviction. A student in Paris listens eagerly to speeches about the future, but wonders quietly whether all futures must sound the same. The radio is both a beacon and a mask, illuminating triumph while concealing strain, uniting millions with words that both inspire and unsettle. What if the system, despite its triumphs, carried within it the seed of collapse? Could the very scale of its victories undo it, the weight of its ambitions breaking its spine? Or would adaptation, even cautious and quiet, allow it to endure, reshaping itself once more, bending but never breaking? The possibilities are countless, each one plausible, each one fragile, each one echoing in the static between words. The broadcast continues, falters, returns. The voice insists that the future is secure, that the path is clear, that victory is eternal. Yet beneath the hum, another sound begins to emerge, the ticking of a clock, soft at first, then sharper, its rhythm steady, inescapable. Time itself becomes the measure of the system, its passage a reminder that no order lasts forever, that every empire carries within it both strength and ending. The radio fades, the static grows, and the ticking continues, louder, clearer, until it fills the room. The child who once asked his mother what the announcer said now listens only to the clock. Its hands move with patience, its face unchanging, its rhythm impartial. The world outside may roar with triumph or crack with dissent, but the clock marks each moment evenly, indifferent to power. Its ticking is both comfort and warning, a sound that cannot be silenced, a reminder that time itself will have the final word. The journey of alternate history spirals to its end, the ticking leading us back to where it began. Berlin, the wall, the city where destinies were divided and reimagined. The ticking of the clock grows louder, each strike a reminder of inevitability, of hours slipping into days, of days flowing into years. Its rhythm is steady, impartial, yet heavy, as though measuring not only time but history itself. The sound fills the kitchen, then the apartment, then the city beyond, until it seems to echo through every street, every square, every monument. And with each tick, the scene transforms, carrying us back to where this journey began, Berlin. The wall still stands, concrete and barbed wire cutting through the heart of the city. Snow gathers along its edges, graffiti scrawled in bright colors, soldiers pacing in silence. Yet in this alternate world, the wall is no longer a symbol of containment or division. It has become a monument to victory, the foundation upon which a new order was built. Imagine the Brandenburg Gate, under gray skies, its columns weathered yet proud, red banners draped across its stone. Crowds gather, not to protest, but to celebrate anniversaries of triumph victories, in Europe, in Africa, in Asia, in space. The speeches echo across the plaza, their words confident, their rhythm deliberate, telling a story of destiny fulfilled. Children wave small flags, their mittens bright against the winter air, their parents watching with expressions that mix pride and fatigue. The wall behind them looms, not contested, not temporary, but permanent. A line redrawn in stone that the world has accepted, and yet, even here, questions linger. The clock ticks on, indifferent to parades and banners. Time erodes stone, weathers monuments, silences voices. Could even this victorious order endure forever? Would cracks appear within its concrete, not from explosions or hammers, but from the patient pressure of memory, of desire, of difference? The people gathered may cheer, but do they all believe? Do some glance at the wall and wonder what lies beyond it, what other stories history might have told. The city of Berlin, more than any other, embodies the paradox of victory. Its streets carry the echoes of tanks, of airlifts, of spies in shadow. Its people live at the intersection of triumph and doubt, of certainty and unease. In this alternate history, the Soviets have won, and yet the city remains restless, haunted by the weight of possibilities never realized. To walk its streets is to feel both the pride of achievement and the fragility of permanence, to sense that even the strongest empire is only a guest in time. Pause now at Checkpoint Charlie, long since repurposed, its guardhouses painted with murals, its barriers replaced by memorials. Tourists come to take photographs, to stand where history bent and reformed. In this version of the world, they do not celebrate freedom gained but victory secured, the triumph of an order that outlasted its rival. Yet the air still carries an echo of footsteps on wet pavement, of soldiers shifting in the cold, of whispered plans of escape. Memory is stubborn. It refuses to be rewritten entirely, even in a world where one side has prevailed. The ticking clock softens, blending with the hush of evening. Street lamps glow against the snow, casting circles of light that fade into the distance. Families return to their homes, candles flicker in windows, radios hum with evening broadcasts. The world continues, its rhythms ordinary, its lives steady, its triumphs heavy with expectation. And above it all, the wall stands, not crumbling, not contested, but enduring, its shadow stretching across the city like a scar that has healed yet remains visible. What if this had been our history? What if the red flag had flown longer, had risen higher, had shaped the destiny of generations not only in Moscow, but in Washington, in Paris, in Tokyo, in Nairobi? Would the world have been freer, or only differently bound? Would humanity have reached the stars united, or stumbled under the weight of ambition? The questions have no answers, only echoes, only shadows of possibility. The clock ticks once more, then fades into silence. The image of Berlin lingers, the wall under twilight, the Brandenburg Gate outlined against a fading sky, the city resting beneath banners and snow. The silence deepens, and in that stillness, imagination drifts. Perhaps it is the end of a story, or perhaps it is only another beginning, another layer in the spiral of what might have been. The red flag ripples faintly in the evening wind, then blurs, dissolves, fades, leaving only the quiet, open-ended question that lingers as eyes grow heavy and dreams begin. What if?